Deaf and Blind Standing Committee. We appreciate everyone being here. My name is Leanne Wood. I'm the chair of this committee, and I represent District 4, which is South Davis County, and then the Rose Park Marmalade districts in North Salt Lake. I'll have Vice Chair Booth if you'd like to introduce yourself, and then if our board members would like to introduce themselves, we'll start with and go down through the order of your districts. So we'll start with Board Member Earl. So go ahead, Vice Chair Booth.
I'm Randy Booth,
Oh dear.
represent District 13, which is City School District, and I'm grateful to be able to serve on this standing committee. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Jenny Earl. I represent District 1. It's all of northern Utah at the top of the state. So, and I too am grateful to be here. So thank you.
I think Member Davis is here. So Member Brenton.
Sorry. Hi, I'm Member Brinton from District 15 in Southern Utah. Happy to be here.
Great. Thank you. And if, oh, there you are. Member Davis, would you like to introduce yourself?
Good morning, Cindy Davis, representing District 11, northern part of Utah County and southern part of Salt Lake County.
Great. Thank you. All right, I think we have one public comment. Just a reminder, you have 2 minutes. Sarah Erb.
Hi there. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks. I'm happy to be here. I'm a parent of a student who is in 5th grade and is a Braille reader and attends a charter school here in Salt Lake City. And I wanted to just kind of share a couple of things about, first of all, I am so elated to have the board initiate this standing committee. Having one spot where parents and teachers, if they're able to, if they're not in their workday, which most of them are able to look at just one area of all of the board meetings throughout the month is really empowering, I think, for them, and also helpful for us to be able to consolidate our efforts when we have so many different demands. I did want to mention that most other boards would have an evening meeting where they would be the governing body for the district. Or the LEA, and that I know makes it hard for teachers that work for USDB, there's quite a few of them, as you know, to be involved and to be able to provide direct feedback to the board members. So thanks for the work you're doing. And one of the things that I would love to help out with is to maybe provide some pathways to get surveys from parents and teachers across the state so that you have their feedback in an anonymous way that is safe and without retaliation when they are wanting to discuss different concerns across the state. Additionally, just making sure that you as board members on this committee have informed consent about what the current issues are, and specific to when we're talking about USDB as a student's LEA, that we're talking about those specific numbers of whether it's a student that is a USB student or a USD student, because the numbers for those two populations are very different. And I don't always see transparency as far as that relates to which numbers are being served when we're talking about USDB as a whole. Thanks so much.
Thank you for your time. Thank you for being here. All right, just a reminder, if you are not speaking, we ask you to turn off your camera. This allows those who maybe need access to the interpreter. It will make it easier for them to be observed. So we have 2 action items today and then a discussion item. Our first item, and I think Ben Rasmussen will be directing this discussion, is on a board bylaw change. Do you want to speak to that first, Ben?
I'd be happy to. Thank you, Chair Wood. Ben Rasmussen, Director of Law and Professional Practices. Staff received a request to draft an amendment to Article 8 of the board bylaws. And so that's what is before you for your consideration today. The current committee procedures and board bylaws do not allow a committee to close its meeting to the public, but there was a feeling that this committee may have some need to talk about student issues that would be sensitive. And so we've added some procedures specific for the USDB committee to allow this committee with prior notice to go into a closed session to talk about specific issues. A reminder that USDB committees are not subject to open meetings, but our bylaws do have that limitation. And so this is just to make committee action consistent with the bylaws. Happy to answer questions if there are any.
Great, thank you. So we will be looking at working off of draft 1. Do you want to share that, Ben, or
Let me
would that
see if
be,
I can. I'd be happy to share my screen if that would.
do you have the ability? Do I need to make you a co-host?
I think so. Is it? Have you got it up there?
You got it. Yep. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. So we'll be working off of draft 1. This was just a proposed language. Of course, board members, you have the option to amend, change, clarify, whatever. Do we have any questions or discussions on this? And I have a lot of people in this meeting, so if you have any comments, please just speak up and it may be easier than trying to manage hands.
Vice Chair Wood, this is Board Member Earl. I have just a question.
Yes, please go ahead.
So, and maybe this is a structural question to the meeting itself. Is this, I guess we would either put this at the end of the meeting or, right? I'm just trying to think, it probably wouldn't be in the middle so that people could continue to watch. Or do you anticipate that being more of just as needed, we'd go in and out of, some kind of a closed meeting in order to do that?
My thought is that an entire meeting would be closed, where it would be referenced that it would not be an open meeting for that month.
Oh, okay.
So if we
It
were
wouldn't be a
specific,
section of the meeting. We wouldn't be voting on it. It would just be noticed as such. Is that what I'm understanding?
that's what my thought is. If that's, but I'm, this is the board's decision, so this will go before the full board and anticipate their concerns also. So if we want to word it such that it may be a partial, like we did last month, because we were talking specifically about those personnel issues. We did an hour of closed and then we opened for an hour. We could word it such that way. So I'm seeking input. That's what this discussion is.
This way, and I guess that's why I'm seeking clarification too, is that it would just be referenced on the meeting site as from 9 till 10:30, we'll do a closed meeting, and then from 10:30 to 12, or so it could be something like that, is what you're saying? Okay, that makes sense. I was just trying to seek some clarification there.
And I will refer to Ben. Do we need to clarify whether it would be that we could do partial or all, or does this language give us that freedom to manage the schedule as appropriate?
I think you just have to put that in your notice. So I think you could do a full meeting, or you could just say we're going to go into closed session at the end of the meeting. As Member Earl suggested, I think this language would allow either way.
Okay, perfect. Any other comments from board members?
I have one question. Would it be something akin or appropriate like we do with executive and board meeting, but just to have a standing, the last 20 minutes or 30 minutes of the meeting, have it be a standing executive for discussion of personnel, or does it have to be ahead of time? We know there is definitely an issue with a student or a teacher or something. It's a little different because this is like a local board as opposed to the state board. So just wondering if that's appropriate. I'm really fine either way. noticing it as the full meeting or partial, but then we may have to have 2 meetings in a month if we have other business that we need to conduct that should be done in full public.
Do you think we would know that enough by that time we would know whether we had full business or not, so we could notice it appropriately and do, an hour and an hour or something? So this language would allow what you're saying.
I think that would add more flexibility rather than just doing a whole meeting
Okay.
close to a whole meeting open. But I'm have the same question you do, Chair Wood, and I'm looking through this, and it doesn't seem like this language is limiting that says it has to be the whole meeting or not the whole meeting, but I need to read it more closely maybe for that specific thing.
Should we put in there just for clarification, may close a meeting or a portion of a meeting? I mean, it's probably unnecessary language, but does that clarify? I guess I would seek Ben's input if clarification helps people feel more
Yeah.
comfortable with what we're trying to do.
I think we could certainly do that if you think that that would make it understood better.
I don't even know if it's needed. I'm
I don't think it's
looking
needed.
at it right now.
I think it leaves it broader, and I think it's better to have the broadness. And then, as you know, especially where this is new, we may have to narrow as we go. But I think, I think there's just some wisdom in not knowing situations to be able to leave this a little broader to start with.
Okay.
Is there only reason why individuals would be because of appropriations? That's my other question. Or would there actually be if there was a concern, a staffing concern? Does that make sense?
I did wonder if we needed to put some of that personnel language that accompanies our discussions when we go into executive for the full board, if there needed to be some of that personnel language.
I think that is likely to come up in the meetings. So it might be a really good idea.
I think we might want to consider adding just a provision such as or any other reason that's allowed under the Utah Open Meetings Act. And I could provide the citation.
Oh, that would be helpful because I was actually reading the Open Public Meeting Act, trying to figure out how to arrange the language that would fit the work that we do. So that would be very helpful.
I think that would be wise too. I mean, the board on some of these things is going to have to they're going to have to go through their process. But even if there was a recommendation to purchase some property or that kind of thing, those things are done in closed session, but that doesn't really spell that out here. So I think that meeting from Open Public's meeting law, and maybe I don't know if we have to put in there something about the intent with it would also come before the board. You know what I mean? It wouldn't be limited. Just some thoughts.
Do one of you want to make that motion? Do you have language that they could add to that?
Does Ben have a suggestion? I don't have language specifically. I'd be happy to make the motion. I move that we amend the board bylaws to add any other purpose allowed by section 52.4.205.
Any discussion to that amendment?
I'm supportive, but I don't think we have a motion on the floor, so I don't think there's anything to amend.
Oh, good
No,
point.
that's true. We haven't moved the draft.
I wonder if we even need to, I mean, if we're including this in the draft, maybe we just move this whole thing.
Yeah, I
So
think
without objection, we add that to draft one. Is there any objection to adding 4? Not hearing any. Okay, so we'll continue to work off draft 1 with an addition of a 4. If there's any other, I will seek a motion if we want to put a motion on the floor so we have something to finalize our discussions with.
I'll make the motion. I recommend that the committee recommends that the board approve. I can't see the rest of it. Okay, the amendments to the bylaws, draft 1 on second and final reading as amended. Do I need to put as amended? Maybe I didn't need to do as amended because we didn't put it before.
We didn't have a draft yet to
No.
amend. So, all right, so we have a motion that the committee recommends that the board approve the amendments to the bylaws, draft 1 on second and final reading. Any discussion to that motion? All right, hearing none, we'll move to a vote. All those in favor of this motion, say aye.
Aye.
Hi.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that motion passes unanimously. So we have that, and that will go to the full board in May. And we will move to our second item on our agenda. So action 1.3 is to put together the makeup of the working group. As you may recall, the legislature recommended through some language from public ed appropriations that we put together a working group that would help with governance, scope of services. I mean, a number of items that we'll discuss later in our meeting. But we decided we wanted to, as we were preparing for this meeting, have a discussion on what that work group should look like. We have we had met with Superintendent Coleman, and I met with some of our smaller district leaders about a week ago and had some discussion of what their concerns were. Made mention to them that we want their input, and then as a Vice Chair Booth and I and the superintendent also discussed this in our planning meeting. So we have a general outline. If someone would like to share that on the screen, we can look at the general outline. This is absolutely not set in stone, and I love and need your input on what the best look for this is. Now, when I spoke with Board Member Davis yesterday, just as an update she discussed an amendment that had been made, or a motion that had been made. And I think we found it, Member Davis, but it's in backup. If that is not the motion that you were referring to, did you happen to have time to look at that?
Sorry, no, not since I talked to you yesterday. I didn't know it got put in backup.
Okay. Thank
Can,
you.
can someone put it on the screen? Is it possible?
I think it's almost being
As long as
shared.
we're covering all the bases of motions that have already been made in this space and this as well, we can combine the two.
Okay. So this is the one we found. Your finance. I'm not sure your title, Kemi, but Kemi worked her magic and found all the motions related to the School for the Deaf and Blind for like the last 6 months. So this is the one we think you were referring to, where you direct staff to work with board members and the legislature to request temporary funding for FTE needs for next year, which we did as we work towards a new formula long-term solution that aligns practice with current or potential code and meets the needs of those working and learning at USDB. The LEAs in the bottom 3 enrollment percent and the large LEAs with 3% or more of the public student population. That's what passed in our December meeting. Is that what you were referring to?
Yes, I just wanted to make sure that we were not, whatever we were doing wasn't contrary to what the board had already done and inclusive of it. So as long as, I mean, I really think it'll be easy to do both or incorporate it into one as we look at this new proposal that you have.
Okay. So the key thing here, I think that's missing in the language that we have to work off of this draft that we're working off is that we do not have a large LEA listed there. So if someone wouldn't mind bringing up that proposed work group and we can work off of that. Perfect. Okay, so this was from our planning committee. Some things, it is large already. So we may want to, add and subtract as we go, but I would not. I think we're all quite experienced with dealing with a 15-member committee and the work that that can include. So I wouldn't go much bigger if, but also I'm open to going smaller. So at this point, we talked about 3 USBE board members because that is what is on the reports and requirements. So we're looking at some patterns of what work groups have already had. Some superintendents, RISA representatives, so our rural schools that might have a more broader perspective of multiple LEAs, the business administrator, 2 USBE staff, 3 USDB staff, a House member, and a Senate member, which was recommended by the legislature in their notes to us through public ed appropriations and executive appropriation, and then 1 member representing charter schools, which I do have. If you wouldn't mind adding a name to that, I was given a name. Nate Marshall, director of Providence Hall, was someone who was interested. So if we move forward with this plan.
And Member Wood,
Yes.
who is Madeline Lee?
So she is the BA from Sevier School District.
So then you have 4 positions for small LEAs.
Currently,
From
that's why.
large. Yeah, so we may need to do some adjusting there, and I'm not sure how. And the other question for the committee is, should one of these be a special ed director as opposed to a superintendent? I'm neither here nor there. I'm just asking the question if there would be wisdom in that.
Can we speak one more time to the intent of this particular group? Is it only to deal with those below the 3%, or is it a broader narrative? That would be important. And if we needed to create a motion for this, then we need to do that.
So let me read to you from the interim study recommendations that came out of public ed appropriations. It says the legislature and the state school board, in fulfilling their constitutional roles in the public education system, need to come together on how USDB fits into the state system and what facilities the school require. The State Board of Education has started a working group to begin to solve the issues surrounding USDB. We recommend that the legislature formalize this process and participate in developing a solution by providing a statutory process that includes the following: direct the State Board of Education to establish a work group to address concerns about USDB governance, oversight, role and scope of service, and facility needs. Include representatives of the Legislative Interim Committee and Public Ed Appropriations Subcommittee appointed by the Speaker and the President to develop a joint understanding of the above items. And then there are other things going into the facility needs, but we're focusing right now in just developing that work group to discuss all those. And then in addition, why we have the small districts that have expressed interest to be involved is because of this 3% rule, recognizing that because we didn't get the bridge funding that we had hoped to for the year, how are we going to, is it create a plan that may necessitate a kind of a bridge plan, or by the end, by when we are to present to PEA and EAC in October and November, we want to have a long-term sustainable plan that will allow funding. So it's kind of trying to do it all in one.
Okay, so we probably do need someone from the 3% group, at least one. And maybe it is a special ed person, maybe it's a superintendent, I don't know.
Can I make a comment?
Yes, please.
Originally, I thought, no, we only need the small districts because they're the only ones affected. Big districts already pay. But since this is looking at a bigger picture, long-term plan, whatever solution comes up may affect the large districts too. And so I would recommend going down the road you're going down, I guess is what I'm saying. Because like, what if we said, oh, take the money off the top every year if the needs increased? Well, that will then start to affect them as well.
Or looking at, I know that there has been discussion about could we do something like the charter school replacement funds or things like that. So I think that we're open book as to what the end looks like right now. And so I'm open to recommendations from the board. Where would you like to see changes made to this list?
Chair Wood, could Superintendent Coleman repeat what he said? He said, I would recommend, and then it went silent for a few minutes, at least on my computer. So I don't know what he recommended. And then all of a sudden we were saying, okay, let's move ahead.
Sure.
Could
Sorry
you
about
repeat what he
that.
said?
Yeah, my recommendation was that we do include districts beyond just the small ones that are currently
Okay.
not paying, because the end solutions could affect everybody and most likely will. Looks like Susan has a comment too.
Yeah, is that right, Board Member Wood?
Yes, please go ahead.
I would also recommend that you do have a special ed director. The conversations that Michelle and I have been having are with special ed directors who know their districts and know the needs very intimately, and they would have a great perspective. They also speak to all of the other special ed directors, whether they're 3% district or lower than 3% district special ed directors. So I would recommend that you have a special ed director.
Thank you. So we've had some recommendations, but board members, I need you to take
think-
advantage of those.
Okay, so I'm just gonna throw this out there. People can do what they want. I would make a motion that we add 2 special ed directors and 1 superintendent or leader from a 3% district.
So we currently have 2 superintendents. Do we want to divide that out and be one from a small district, one from a large district?
Yeah, that would be fine.
Okay. So this is more discussion. We don't need we have there's no motion on the board at this time. So do we need to move the committee as it stands and then start to amend it, or do we want an open discussion and just without objection we move forward?
I like the open discussion.
Okay.
I agree.
Okay. So right now we're looking at, so let's split that 2 superintendents. If you want to, and the names were just people who volunteered, said they'd be interested in the discussion. So that was just so you know why they're there. They were open to being a part of it. So if you want to put those names down on the second line, just so they're not, we know that, and they would not. Yeah, there we go. Thank you. Perfect.
And then I would recommend 2 special ed, and maybe the same thing, one from a rural, one from a 3% or larger, however you want to term that.
Okay. And are we looking at growing the committee to 17?
I think we can grow it to 20. I mean, I think 15's a good number. I think when you get way, way big, you got problems. But I think the expertise of these individuals and the key people that you need there, I think up to 20. I don't think we want to go beyond that. So I don't have any problems adding a couple of new ones.
Okay. All right.
And if you're concerned about that, Chair, I'd probably take off the RISA representative, because you've already got from rural schools a superintendent and a business administrator and a special ed director
Okay.
and a charter school person. So you got small LEAs represented still 4 times with the new addition. So I don't know that you need a RISA in there as well.
Okay. So we're looking at adding an LEA special director from a small and large. And then if we want to take off the RISA representative.
I like the RISA representative. So
Yeah. Okay.
I like Piper, but that's not why I'm saying I like the RISA representative. I think that your RISA representatives have a unique perspective because they have so many, whereas they have so many that they're working with. So they would have an idea of transportation. They would have an idea of, right, all these different mechanisms.
Then why don't we take off the business administrator?
Why are you wanting to limit it to 15? Maybe that's the question.
That was expressed at the beginning of the meeting. Our chair said she'd be willing to entertain going the same or less, but not more, she'd prefer. So I'm trying to, I'm just trying to, but
Yeah,
I
and this is
do
the will
think,
of the board, right?
I do think, what if we, on this, the large and small superintendents, that could be a superintendent or a business administrator.
I feel like maybe we need a motion on this and then we can do it. I feel like going up to 20 is fine. I don't want to go over 20. You're right, 15 is probably a good number, but all of these individuals have unique expertise. And I think if we're going to really get to where we need to get, I think we're going to need a variety of perspectives and some really good depth when it comes to discussions here. So
I'd love to hear from Member Booth or Member Brinton. Do you have any opinions on size or representation?
I am grateful to get all the right people on the bus. And I don't think that it's critical that we determine how many people we have on the bus at this point. I think we need to discuss the needs. And if the needs require an additional person, I'm not worried about a couple of extra people.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate that input. Member Brinton, do you have any opinions on this? I just sometimes with
I
Zoom.
agree. Yeah, I agree. I don't know enough yet about working in this arena to have an opinion, so I will go along with the majority.
Okay. All right.
Whatever you all think. Yeah.
And I don't want to call you out. I just know sometimes in Zoom it's not as easy to just interrupt in and break in. So I just want you to make sure you're comfortable in sharing your opinions.
Chair Wood.
Yes.
I would just say the con of getting bigger and bigger is it's really hard to get this many schedules together to have meetings. But the pro of having bigger is that, almost the same thing we found in Reports and Requirements Task Force, that not everybody could come to every meeting. And so then, then it is helpful to have a little bit more. So I'm fine with whatever the will of the group is also.
Oh, okay. Sounds good. Now there has been I know we talked about at one time the necessary of having someone from the LFA's office, so that there's an understanding uh, when we get to those final budget items. Do we feel like, so if we're growing, since we're talking about numbers here, would it be at least to have them on the committee, someone from, we have Ben or Kiki from the LFA office that generally deal with USDB. Would it be more of a benefit for us to at least have them on the committee, whether they can all, I don't know that we'll ever get all these people in the same room at the same time, but at least have them be aware of minutes that were coming from the committee or have them attend as they can. Does anyone have any opinions on that, whether it be someone from the LFA office or the governor's office, any of those? And I might seek input from, I think we have a few legislators here today, and I apologize for not having you introduce yourselves to our legislators. I think we have Representative Thompson and Representative Coford here today. If I missed anyone, I'd love for you to offer input on this, given that this direction really does come from you as the legislature. If there was anyone who wanted to speak up. Okay, not seeing any
Chair
comment.
Wood.
Yeah.
While they're thinking if they want to speak up, I would say however you do it, I would just leave it open-ended. When we did the charter task force with the replacement fund, we had the treasurer's office had one spot, and then they just rotated whomever they could send to the meeting. So it wasn't one person every time. I would suggest the LFA over the governor's office, but
Okay.
but it doesn't have to always be Ben. It could be
Right.
one of their representatives.
Absolutely. And that's really where I'm looking at here is it, I put names in just because those people had expressed interest when we had our small meeting with them. But I think all of these are, especially as you look at staff, it will be who can come, right?
I would actually, I maybe would recommend something just slightly different. I think that as we get things sorted out and narrowed down, I think that's when we involve them. Anyways, I kind of feel like they have their ideas of where they want to go, and I don't want them to overpower the suggestions of different members of the body here.
And that had been my original thought, that it would be
Yeah.
an invite as we come, because I think we have people from DFCM when we talk about facilities. We're
Yes.
going to need to invite their expertise in. As we talk about funding, we'll need to invite others' expertise in. So
We probably need to just stick with a set group, and then with the understanding that as we move through the different provisions, we would have a few extra based on the need, kind of. Is that what you're thinking? So if we're doing facilities, then we would invite a couple people that have the expertise in that area. If we're doing asking about detail on the finance end of it, then we would have same thing there. Is that accurate? Is that
that's exactly what I was thinking.
okay? And the other question I have, one other possible item would be, I know that the advisory council, would we want a representative there, or is that kind of out of the scope of maybe their ability to attend even? I don't know how.
I would ask Superintendent Coleman if you have input on that. Do we need someone from advisory, a community member? Do we need a parent, or what is your input on
It's
that?
actually their job to advise the board and the administration. So I hadn't thought of that, but I I think it's probably a good idea to invite an advisory council member.
Should we just put advisory, hoping that maybe the chair could participate as the representative, but knowing he could send someone else if that didn't work?
I like that idea. I think that's great.
Okay, so let's put that under the two LEAs. Let's put a member of the advisory council.
Another question, Chair Wood.
Yes.
Are the three board members from this committee, or are they from anyone on the whole board? And then the other question is, if the three are not from, I think the three probably should be from this committee, but if they're not, I think at least our chair should be a member of this working group. Not that you need one more thing to do. I'm sure you need it like a hole in your head, but just for consistency's sake and communication's sake, I think it would be really important to at least have you on that committee, if not three members from this committee.
I kind of feel strongly it needs to be from the committee, and maybe I just think we are aware of the dynamics, we're aware of what's going on. I think when we ask someone else, and whatever we decide to do, but I just think there's wisdom in that, because there's just a continuity and a consistency.
Okay, thank you.
Then I just have one more question, and I can't speak to this, but maybe, superintendent can, or some of his associate or deputy superintendents. But are there any groups that work consistently with our families and our students that we might want to also have a representative from? I know we're getting close to the 20 mark, but I'm just thinking of some of the support groups out there, and maybe not. Maybe that's not the case, but I just had wondered if there was.
I would recommend not. And
Okay.
here's why on that. I mean, it's always hard when you're brainstorming because you don't want to say anyone to feel like, oh, you don't want our opinion.
Yeah.
The scope of this seems to be really structural and administrative,
Okay.
ultimately for the state. And each of those groups has a specific mission and agenda that really is not consistent with the intent of this working group, I think.
Right. And I think you're probably right. I just thought I would ask. Maybe I wasn't thinking of, you know what I mean? I just had wondered if there was any of them, but I think now that you said that, it probably they have their unique perspective, meaning their own goals and their own initiatives associated with their organization. So, okay.
All right, so let's look at that. We're at three,
I'm
4, 5,
wondering,
6, 7.
Chair,
Yes, go ahead.
I'm just wondering if from our USDB staff, if we, in order to be able to move forward in the most efficient way possible, if we don't need at least the 4 that we generally have in our full board meetings. I mean, of course, we need superintendent. We need both associate superintendents because their work is so specific in their areas, and Carl or someone representing the finance. I mean, almost any question can be answered if those 4 are there. And when we're in this kind of a working setting trying to determine, I think it would be most helpful to have those same 4 available because they're kind of carrying the ball day to day.
Randy, I thought that too. And then my second thought was that Carl and his staff are now going to be USBE staff. And so he may be included in those 2. I'm assuming Deborah will certainly be, and it'll probably be up to Superintendent Jones how he does that, but that might be covered there anyway.
Okay, and I was thinking USBE staff was more like special education, certainly
Oh yeah,
Leah.
that's
I
right.
mean, the people that are most directly involved in these wonderful students,
Yeah, you might need to have more than 2 USBE
these
staff
very
depending on.
specific kinds of needs.
Well,
Anyway,
and that
just
really is
thoughts.
up to we don't assign our staff out, so that would be up to the superintendent and how those staff are assigned out. So um so are you making a recommendation, Randy, for 4 or Vice Chair Booth, 4 USDB staff?
Yes.
I think that's number 6, the 4 USDB. Do we feel we need to increase the number of USB staff? I might ask for input from USB staff here, whether that be Deputy Superintendent Voorhees or do you have any input on number of staff from your area, or is it good to leave it open because you can come as we're discussing it? I mean, as we get into the deep dive of finances, it's going to be different than scope of service. Like, again, do you have any input on that?
Vice Chair, what are you asking me? This
I
is
am, sorry.
Deputy Superintendent Voorhees.
I am, sorry.
Okay, there goes my camera. Yeah, I think it makes sense to have me representing special education or, someone else from the special education team, and then someone representing finance. And which, Scott could choose, and he would probably choose Deborah, but I think that makes sense to have one program and one finance.
Okay, so to there, it's okay to leave it open because that way if you're not available, you can send someone, but it's very related to those.
Agreed.
I agreed
Yeah.
it would, and even then, so for that, it would be special education and finance. And even in terms of USDB staff, it would be the USB, USD, and finance, really.
Yes, the 4 Musketeers.
Yeah. Well, we might kick you off, Joel.
That's fine too.
Sorry. USB, USD, and then finance again.
And Chair Wood,
Yes.
can I just make one quick other note going back up to USBE staff? In past task forces, it's important for everyone to remember that these two might be kind of official. Task force members don't vote. We really operate on the will of the group, but these would be two official contributing members. But multiple of our other staff will be there to facilitate either administratively or legally. We may have an attorney that is present to just help in case we have legal questions. So I don't want anybody to feel that, oh, well, these folks weren't on the list because we do have a variety of people that are there to serve these different purposes, and they will attend intermittently. I just want that to be either discussed or made known.
I appreciate that. And I have actually requested from USBE that they provide a facilitator, someone who's trained in taking large groups through hard questions and coming out with something at the end, which I am not, and I will freely admit that. So I have asked that someone with those skills
That's a great idea, in my opinion.
be put in charge of that. All right. We have massaged that a lot. We're at 10:46. I would love
I
to
think
seek a
Leah has a
motion.
comment, perhaps.
Yes.
It was just a quick that we have assigned an individual to be the facilitator and an individual to be support to take meeting minutes and facilitate logistics. So we have taken care of that.
Perfect. Thank you. So I would seek a motion on this and then we can
I have one more
finalize.
thing.
Yes.
Just on the special ed director, since we have some names that are kind of suggested up there, I would suggest for the large district special educator, either Tiffany from Davis or Bryce from Granite to be reached out to. I know Alpines is retiring and they're splitting, and so I don't think they would be good to reach out to at this time, but I think these are the next largest, and I think either of those would be great. And then and I'll be honest, I also sought recommendations from our special ed staff on that as well. And then maybe if they have a recommendation, Leah or someone for a small district special ed director that's been pretty involved in the past, we would have someone to reach out to. Or a
Okay.
couple of names.
And I would propose that the names not be part of the motion, just so that we can, we kind
Okay.
of have our structure.
That's fine.
But
But we know we can reach out to those folks.
Yes. Yeah, that's my my recommendation, but I'm not going to make the motion. So I will seek a motion and then we'll kind of finalize it according to board member desires.
I'm happy to make that motion if you go down on the document a little bit so I can read the top. Yeah, okay, so I recommend that the committee recommends that the board approve the following makeup of the USDB working group. Proposed members for 19-person USDB working group, facilitator assigned from USBE, 3 USBE board members, 2 superintendents, 1 small, 1 large, RISA representative, 1 RISA representative, 1 business administrator, 2 USBE staff, 4 USDB staff. Do you want me to read out superintendent, assistant superintendents, finance? Do I need to read that then?
No,
Okay.
I
Okay, 1 House member from public ed, interim or PA, 1 Senate member from public ed, interim or PA, 1 member representing charter schools, 2 LEA special education directors, 1 from small, 1 from large, USDB advisory council members, and invitees based on content need.
Okay. That's what there's the official motion. Any amendments to that motion? Okay, I'm not seeing any. We'll move to a vote. All those in favor of the working group and motion as stated, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, great. We will move that to the full board. That passes unanimously. Thank you. All right, our last item of the agenda is to begin our process of working through the questions that were given us from public ed appropriations. And I've asked Deputy Superintendent Voorhees to lead this presentation for the first two questions, really, under scope, role, and scope of service. And are you okay if they ask you questions as we move along?
Of course.
Okay, and so this is board member questions, and I think I will let you, do you want me to let you know if they're hands, or would you like to watch for that?
It would be easier if you could let me know.
Okay, all right, then I will turn the remainder of our time over to Deputy Superintendent Voorhees.
Thank you. Leah Voorhees, Deputy Superintendent of USBE. And I'm happy to share some information about the requirements of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which is the federal law regarding special education, and also the Utah State Board of Education special education rules, and a little bit about state code to help board members think about the questions that the legislature gave you about how does USDB fit into the state public education system. And that's really the question, the large global question on the table. I'm going to just talk about the legal requirements and then give you some questions for consideration at the end. Couple things before we start getting into the law, which I'm going to go through really quickly because I don't think you need to understand all the ins and outs of the law. What I think you need to understand is your responsibility and the related to implementing the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act and the decision points that you as a board have related to where USDB can play a role in the system. And the system is your responsibility, and I'll show that legally. And USDB, you as board members in conjunction with the legislature can make the determination of how much of the system USDB is responsible for or how little of the system. And those are kind of the decision points. A couple things to consider as I'm going through this. The Individuals with Disabilities Education Act is statute. There are then regulations that the Department of Education has made, which provide states with and local education agencies, school districts and charter schools with implementation requirements. But in special education, there's a whole like almost bigger layer of the law, and that's case law. So I think all of you probably know that special education is the most adjudicated part of education law, and it's more adjudicated even than some other parts of the law besides education, because there are federally mandated processes for parents and educators to be able to have their concerns heard and considered by neutral third parties. So the statute is obviously what Congress said that they wanted to happen, but then judges for the past 21 years, because the most recent version of the statute was 41. The original one is 40 years old, and then the most recent version was passed in 2004. So for 21 years, judges have been making the determinations about whether or not services and supports and processes follow the law. So we have an enormous amount of case law in special education that we have to follow. And when it comes to the schools for the deaf and the blind, the processes that they have been following, the services and supports that they have been providing for many years become precedent for case law. So you have to take that into consideration. Even though some of the things that they have been doing are not required by law, and I'll try to articulate a few of those. Because they have been doing them, a parent might have a right to file a request for a hearing and say they have been doing it, therefore they have established precedent that it should now be required. Whether or not a parent would win is up to a hearing officer, and in some cases, precedent bears more credibility to a hearing officer than in other cases. But that's just something to take into consideration as we go through these slides. So just a reminder about the legislative questions that you have been asked to respond to. So Utah, or the Utah State Board of Education, is the grantee. So, oh, sorry, I see that Board Member Davis has her hand up.
Oh, just a little question about what you said about case law precedent. Is that pretty well established? Because I just keep thinking, I know that there are other states that don't have a school for the deaf and the blind, and they still are achieving FAPE. And I've been trying to wrap my head around, well, how do we answer that question? Because that's going to come up, and it has come up. And so, but you just said is really important that, so is that been often where there's case law precedent where it's, if it has been done, then it should continue to be done, that it should be?
That has happened, but the concern is that I want you to consider is not that it is that when something that is not required necessarily for FAPE has been provided, okay, and we will I will get to one later in the discussion. Transportation is going to come up as one of those things, because door-to-door transportation is not required for FAPE. Okay. However, an individual student may need door-to-door transportation because transportation is a related service that an IEP team determines if the student requires. So for an agency to provide door-to-door transportation, that is not required for FAPE. For a student, one individual student, it may be, okay? But because USDB has been providing door-to-door transportation for students who it is not required for FAPE, those parents may say, well, you've established a precedent that you have given us this service, so now this service is required for FAPE. And that would be something that a judge would have to consider. And in some cases, historically, judges have said, yes, that is true. In the majority of cases, they have said, no, that is not true. But what you need to be aware of is that parents will have the right to file requests for due process hearings, and when and if you choose to change the service delivery pattern for students who are blind, visually impaired, deaf, hard of hearing, and deafblind, that may trigger due process hearing requests. And I can't say what the decisions will be, but I want you to know that if and when you choose to change the service delivery pattern, that may trigger due process hearing requests.
That's really helpful. I should have thought of that sooner too. I keep thinking, this is better for our students because it's so isolating sometimes in a local LEA, but not necessarily have to be there for FAPE. But these are really interesting legal questions. Thank you.
Yes, and I've got a list of them for you at the end. So, so that's why I'm going to go through what is actually required quickly and get to those questions that you really need to consider at the end. So Utah, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act is an act of Congress. It stands, the law stands whether there is funding or not for the law. So you, as the state, as policymakers in the State Board of Education, the legislature, are required to implement the law, whether or not the federal government provides any funding. So that's an important consideration. So the State Board of Education is the grantee, and you have several requirements as a grantee. You have a requirement to monitor and provide support for the implementation of the IDEA among LEAs. You have the requirement to ensure that all students receive FAPE. That is actually your requirement. And then you delegate that to LEAs when they become sub-grantees or when you provide them funding. But it is actually the requirement of the state education agency. So you have the responsibility to ensure that funding is used appropriately. You have the responsibility to collect data and report the data back to the federal government. You have all of these responsibilities to ensure that providers are qualified, to ensure that we work with other public agencies, to ensure that there is an advisory panel, which you have, the Utah Special Education Advisory Panel, to ensure that records are retained according to the statute and that students have access to instructional materials, accessible instructional materials, such as Braille and large print and other materials. So in the actual statute, okay, this list are the things that you are responsible for. Then when you provide funding to school districts and charter schools, then they become sub-grantees, and they are then responsible as a result of you delegating that power through sending them funding. They're responsible to provide a free, appropriate public education to all eligible students. They're responsible to ensure that educators are licensed according to your rules or the legislature's or the legislature's rules. They are required to ensure that students receive the instructional materials in accessible formats that they need to receive FAPE. So USDB is also a sub-grantee. And the way that state law and Board of Education rule is currently outlined, they can become a designated LEA. So they, for the purposes of providing FAPE, the IEP team can designate them as the LEA, and you have granted them that power. Or they can simply provide services to a student within an LEA. And so the LEA remains the agency responsible for FAPE, and USDB provides services. So USDB can either be a designated LEA and be responsible for FAPE, or they can provide services through the LEA that is responsible for FAPE. And that's outlined in your rules. So briefly, to go over the process. The first thing that happens is an LEA has to locate, identify, and evaluate any student within their catchment area, within the area that is their LEA. If they are a school district, okay, they have to find students who may be eligible for special education. And if they're a charter school, then their catchment area is just those who have enrolled in their charter school. If they're a district, it's everyone who lives, who resides in that area. For charter schools, it's just those who have enrolled. And if the district or charter school suspects that the student has a disability, or the parent comes forward and says anything to the effect of, they don't have to use these words, okay? Anything to the effect of, I'm worried about my student. My student isn't doing well. I have concerns about my student, which means, translates into, I suspect my student may have a disability. Then the LEA has to, whether it's a district or a charter school, has to evaluate that student to determine eligibility. And there you have a very prescribed process for that. IDEA has a very prescribed process. It's a very prescriptive law. Okay, so there are 13 disability categories. And a team of individuals has to evaluate and determine if the student is eligible. And then if the student is eligible, then develop an individualized education program. And people say plan all the time, but it isn't a plan. An IEP is a program. A 504 is a plan. Okay, as the accommodations that a student needs under 504 is a plan, but for IDEA, it's a program, because it's a whole set of services and supports, which I'm now going to show you. And then the process also includes dispute resolution, which is what I just said about an individual who is unhappy and is worried that the student is not either being evaluated, being evaluated, or having an IEP. They can file a complaint, and anyone can file a complaint, not just a parent. Board Member Earl, it looks like you have a question.
Yeah, I guess I'm just trying to figure out what does and you've spoken to it a little bit, but just the extent of the find piece. And you even just said it now, that if they didn't find my child, I'm just trying to figure out where those parameters are and where that boundary is or isn't. Do you have any insight into that?
That's a great question. There's a ton of case law about it. So students who are struggling academically and or functionally. So IDE eligibility is a 3-prong test. First of all, the student has to have a disability. The disability has to, and this is, I think, the key to answering your question, Board Member Earl, the disability has to affect academic and or functional performance, behavior, social, emotional, obviously academic because it's its own category, but functional performance generally is behavioral, social, emotional, and so if the student is struggling in one of those 4 areas, then that is a red flag. That is notice. Notice is the legal word that is used. Notice to the LEA that the student may need to be evaluated. An LEA does not have to evaluate every single student who fails a test or gets in a fight on the playground. Okay, what an LEA has to do is look at the data, review data, and determine if they suspect, again, that's the legal term, if they suspect that what they are seeing, the struggle that they are seeing, whether short-term or consistent over time, could be related or is possibly related to a disability. And if they suspect that it is related to a disability, then they need to evaluate. If something happens or consistently or just moment in time where a student is struggling and they don't think it's related to a disability because there's something going on in the student's life that would that could bring about that type of struggle, then they do not have to evaluate, but they do have to, there is a notation that is required that says, we considered it. We see that we have identified this child as struggling, but we are not going to evaluate because we have considered the data and we don't actually suspect that the struggle is related to a disability. But it does have to be noted. Does that help?
Yeah, that's helpful. I guess I was just trying to recall there was, and I can't remember which specific program. It seemed like there was a program with flexibility that we were considering last year, and there was some, I don't know if it was Utah Fits All or if it was another one, but there was some argument about it or some discussion related to the child find. Like people won't be able to find children that have a need if you're opting out of accessing the possibility of being part of a, program. But it seems to me that you couldn't actually, I'm just talking out loud, find someone if you don't have knowledge of, right? I mean, that's kind of the piece. So,
right. So you have to have data that suggests there is a struggle. You have to see there is a struggle, or parents come to you and say, I'm worried about my kid. Then that is data that suggests there is a struggle.
Member Earl, was that related to the affidavit of homeschool when they were removing that required affidavit?
maybe it was. I couldn't remember, but I was trying to understand the dynamics to make sure. It may have been, actually. Yeah, I think now that I'm thinking about it, I think it was. Thank you.
Member Davis.
I was just going to say the same thing. I think it was the affidavit because as a principal, I used to use those affidavits and go out annually to visit each family to say, if you suspect there is a need, we're here to support you and to look at those assessments, and we'll be happy to do that for you if you need it. And also that we're not trying to fit square pegs into round holes, and had a lot of homeschooling families that would end up coming for just math or just art, and then some that did have a concern about, even if it was just speech, could get an assessment and some support there for special ed through these child find laws.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next. So in this one, this past slide was the four major responsibilities of the process. So now we're going to dig a little bit deeper into the IEP development. So in order to develop a compliant IEP, there needs to be 5 members of the IEP. They're required IEP members, and then there's a 6th when appropriate. That's parents, regular general education teachers, special education teachers, or providers. And providers, like a speech language pathologist is a provider. Behavior support specialist is a provider. A reading specialist may or may not be a teacher, interventionist, okay? LEA representative. So this is an individual who can commit resources, an individual who generally facilitates the meeting, but that's not the requirement. The requirement in the law is that the LEA representative is the person who, when in the meeting, recognizes, and they can't say anything about the fact that the services and supports may have an expense, or that the LEA may or may not have capacity to provide the services and the supports that the IEP team determines are required. But there has to be an LEA representative in the room that knows that when that IEP has been developed, the LEA is going to have to provide those services and supports, and that's why the representative is required. And then an individual who can interpret the results of evaluation of any assessment that's been done. Generally, it's a school psychologist, but it's often also a speech language pathologist, because Almost half of the students with disabilities in our state, their disability is related to a speech language issue. And then when appropriate, the student should be invited to their IEP meeting, especially older students. And then a USDB representative, for the purposes of this conversation, is invited if applicable. And I'm going to show you what the definition of applicable is. So applicable, according to your rules, okay, are that when a student, the 3 bullets on the left are the important ones, when a student when USDB is going to be the designated LEA. So when the student is going to attend USDB full-time, attend one of USDB's classrooms, then a representative of the LEA and a representative of USDB have to be in an IEP meeting. They both become required members. When USDB is being considered to be the designated LEA, the IEP team hasn't yet decided, but the discussion is going to occur, and it is an IEP team discussion. It's not a decision. It's not a USDB decision. It is not an LEA decision. It is not a parent decision. There are only 2 ways that decisions are made related to special education. The team makes the decision, or a hearing officer makes the decision. So if the team can't come to consensus, we don't vote in meetings. If the team can't come to consensus, the team should try again, get back together, review the data again. If the team can't come to consensus, the LEA representative on the team makes the decision. And then the parents have due process request rights, and they can file a due process request and have a neutral third party, a hearing officer, review the decision. So teams come to consensus. If they can't, the LEA representative says, okay, we've had a really good discussion. We've given it a really good college try. We can't get there. I'm going to say this is what is required for FAPE. And then the parents can say, I disagree. And then a hearing officer makes the decision. Okay, so that's the process. And then the third bullet is when a student receives 180 minutes or more of service from USDB. Now, this is an important distinction because the legislature has determined that a student who receives 180 minutes of special education service, they receive funding in a different manner. It's the same amount of funding, but it doesn't come through a special education add-on. It comes through special education self-contained, the formula. So the amount is identical. The amount does not change, but where it comes through the formula is a little bit different. So you as the board determined that taking that precedent of half a day, 180 minutes, 3 hours, half of a school day, if a student needs more than half of a day of service from the Schools for the Deaf and the Blind, which students who are learning Braille often do, then especially when they're younger, not as much when they're older, but when they're younger, or when they're receiving communication services, they're deaf and hard of hearing, learning ASL or listening and spoken language, then USDB needs to be a required member of that IEP team. Okay, so those are the 3 cases in which you have determined as a board through your rule that USDB becomes a required member. So USDB would also be considered a member of the IEP team, although not necessarily required, but certainly best case when USDB is providing an itinerant service. And if you go back, the reason that I'm going to go back one slide. Okay, so the reason that USDB, sorry, didn't mean to do that, is not necessarily a required member, but really it's safest and most compliant if USDB is at the table when they are a service provider, is because of the third bullet on this required membership. Because at least one special education teacher or provider is a required member, and there's a significant amount of, a reasonably significant amount of case law that when the student is receiving different types of special education service, it's really in the best interest of the IEP team for a representative of those different types of services to be in the meeting. And USDB's service would definitely be different. And I can't say whether or not would be required, because that would be for a hearing officer to say. What I can tell you is there's a reasonably significant, reasonably large amount of case law that would say, yep, that makes sense. So that's the IEP membership. Okay, so then with all of that information considered, this is the process that Congress outlined for the development of the IEP. Now we have the members, we know who's supposed to be at the table. This is the process. It's very linear. It's actually really simple because it's so linear. You do 1, 2, 3, and then 4, which is on the next slide. The team talks about the strengths and needs of the student. The team looks at all the data and identifies what is the present level of academic and functional performance. And then once the team feels good about the academic and functional performance, then they go on to step 2, which is the goals. And goals are made for generally for a year. There is an exception, but we're not going to talk extensively about that. When a student is taking the alternate assessment, when the student is being taught with alternate standards and taking the alternate assessment, meaning that student has a significant cognitive disability, then they also need to have benchmarks so that it's not just an annual goal, but we can see progress throughout the goal. But that doesn't, that's not a big issue in as far as the decisions that you have to make. Then the next thing is that the team determines if what services and supports this. Oh, sorry. Board Member Davis, I think I saw your hand.
Is that percentage statewide still about 1% who are doing alternate assessment? And what percent of students in USDB schools are taking the alternate assessment?
I don't have that data in front of me. Associate Superintendent Patton might know that. I could find that data in a minute, but I don't have it in front of me.
I can get it from you later. Thank you.
Okay, I was just going to say, Board Member Davis, that it is a significant amount more than the 1%, and that's typically because of the School for the Blind. We have a larger demographic taking the alternate assessment, and I don't have the percentage right now, but I certainly am happy to get that for you as well. I can get it before the end of this meeting, actually.
Thank you. That'd be helpful. Thanks.
Yep, I've got that on the list, so Susan and I can respond. Okay, so when it comes to services and supports, it's really important to think about the fact that special education as a service, like what happens is instruction. Okay, the definition, Congress's definition of special education is a little complicated because special education is the whole process, right? The law, IDEA uses special education to represent the whole process. But IDEA also uses special education to just represent the service that a student needs to be able to accomplish their goals. And the law defined that as specially designed instruction, with instruction being the key. It's not changing the student's seating. It's not giving the student a calculator. It's not, it is instruction. It's generally a teacher or a provider, like a speech language pathologist or a school psychologist, working with, talking to, teaching the student. Okay. And that gets confusing to people because there are lots of supports that students with disabilities get, but that's not specially designed instruction. So every single student that is eligible for special ed, and this is the third prong of that stool I was talking about earlier to board member Earl's question. Student has to have a disability. The disability has to affect academic and functional performance. And the third prong is it has to require specially designed instruction. And that's how Congress defined how a team could then determine that the student was eligible, is that the student required special instruction, not just moving the student's seat or giving the student a calculator or reading the test to the student, but teaching the student more, better, different. Okay. And those are three really important words: more, better, different. Okay. So every single student eligible for an IEP has to require that instruction, that special instruction. Then some students also require a related service. And the related service helps the student access the specially designed instruction. Not all students require related service. And here's where the transportation question comes up. Transportation is a related service. It's not instruction. So not all students require it. Only some students require it in order to access the specially designed instruction. Okay. Other related services, speech language service. This is a weird one because speech language service can actually be specially designed instruction, but it can also be a related service. So that's a little complicated. But for the purposes of the questions that you have on the table today, you are going to want to think about speech language services as a related service. And then supports, all sorts of supports. And there are supports like the calculator and like the seating and like the reading aloud and like extra time to finish assignments. But there are also supports for adults that will then help the student. Sometimes teachers need professional learning so that they understand the student. Sometimes paraeducators need professional learning so that they understand the student. Sometimes families need counseling to be able to support the student. So supports are not just directly for the student. Supports can be for the adults in the student's life as well. And then accommodations, accommodations, those are the calculator and the special seating and reading things aloud, giving kids extra time. Okay, but those are not instruction. And every student with an IEP has to require more, better, different instruction in order to be eligible. The fourth thing on the list, really important to your conversation, is placement. And it always happens fourth. Remember, this is linear. You never go to placement first. You always start with the present level, the strengths and needs, and then the team determines the goals. And then the team determines what services the student needs to meet the goals. And then the team determines the service. And this is really important for the questions that the legislature has required you or asked you, recommended. I think it's a requirement, but that you answer. because placement comes at the end, okay, at the end of a team decision. So it is required that the team determine in a group of 5 options, the 5 placement options that are a continuum, that the team determine and pick the option that is the least restrictive for the student in order for the student to get the services and to access their peers, access their same age, same grade peers. And there are 5 options, and the team can choose any of the options, but the team must choose the option that allows the student to get the services that they need as close to their same age, same grade peers as possible. Okay, and that becomes a little complicated. But if you think about it this way, okay, so placement is not about where you sit. Placement is about what you get. Because placement is about where can you get the services that the team already determined you needed, because services, which is number 3. Okay, so that's already been decided. Hard stop. Okay. Team determined you needed these services. Where can you get those services that is as close as possible to your same age peers? Okay, and as close as possible to home, like, you know, to the kids in your neighborhood and to the activities that are going on in your world. And that is called the least restrictive environment. Okay, so they're, like I said, they're on a continuum. Then IEP team does not have to try the most or the least restrictive environment first. The IEP team doesn't have to say, well, we have to try regular class before we move to special class, or we have to try special class before we move to special school. The IEP team has to look at the services and say, where can we get the student those services that are as close to the same age peers as possible. A regular class is just the regular class that the student would be in, and they're with all general education peers. Okay. A special education class is only students with disabilities, but it's in a school with their same age, same grade peers. So they have access to them at different times during the day, but their class is just students with disabilities. A special school is the building only houses students with disabilities. Okay, which USDB has several of those. Okay, USDB has special classes, also has special schools. Home instruction, obviously at home. And it's really difficult to access your same age peers if you're home, unless you have a twin or triplets, but they're probably at school, so it's really hard to access your same age peers. And then the most restrictive is instruction in a hospital or in an institution. Okay, so the IEP team says, these are the services the student needs. Where can we get them that is as close as possible to same age, same grade peers? Okay.
So, Leah.
Yes, sorry.
So if you've already invited USDB into the circle, it's interesting because you talked about it being a very ordered process. So there is some assumption of what those services and supports will be already if you've invited USDB into the circle already. How does that work?
Great question. Okay, so IEP teams cannot predetermine, or as school districts and charter schools cannot predetermine what a student is going to get. That's also a tenet of the regulations and case law. So the school district or charter school can't say, or USDB can't say, well, this is what this is the student's disabilities, therefore the student gets this, and then take that program to the IEP team and say, okay, team, this is what the student gets. And the parents are like, but wait a minute, we didn't have a part in this conversation. And so that it becomes difficult, especially when you've got the LEA and you've got USDB. And I think that's one of the important considerations for you as a board in answering the legislature's question. USDB has established relationships with school districts and charter schools have established relationships with USDB so that they can really, give it that. A judge actually said this, which is why I keep saying it. That good college try of talking about what are all the options for the student. Okay. And coming together and saying, okay, these are the regular class options. These are the special class options. These are the special school options. Where can we get the services and supports that the student needs? And sometimes the school district or charter school has regular class and special school, and USDB has a special class and a special school. And so the IEP team has to really talk through, what does the student need, like, in order to receive a free, appropriate public education, and then make the best decision that they can. And if it's not a great decision, they can come back together in 6 weeks. And it's really important. The Supreme Court has said now twice, 2 different cases that were more than a decade apart, almost 2 decades apart. The Supreme Court has said twice, the way a team determines if a student, if the IEP is reasonably calculated, these are their words, reasonably calculated to provide a FAPE, okay, to provide a free, appropriate public education, is if the student is making progress. So the IEP team gets together, looks at the data, looks at the services and supports that the student has received, and looks at the progress. And if the student's not making progress, then that IEP is not reasonably calculated to provide a FAPE. The team has to redevelop the IEP or amend the IEP and do more, better, different. Okay. If they come together and like, yeah, the student is making so much progress, then their conversation is, so could the student continue to make this type of progress if the student was in a less restrictive environment? Unless they're already in regular class, and then you can't get less restrictive. But if the student's in a special school or the student's in a special class, then the Supreme Court has said, okay, the student is making great progress. It is now the responsibility of the IEP team to say, the student is getting services and supports, making great progress. Could the student move into a less restrictive environment and still make progress? And if the team says, no, really, it's this environment where these services and supports are being provided that is doing it, then the student stays. If the team says, these services and supports could be provided, although it might look a little different, it might, in a less restrictive environment, then the IEP team has a responsibility to make that change.
Leah, I think Superintendent Patton would like to.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, Susan.
Oh, no. Leah's doing such a phenomenal job. I love how she explains special ed law always. But I was going to, Board Member Wood, I was going to answer the question too, when does USDB come in? A lot of times we do get calls as far as I'm talking about School for the Blind, get a call. We have the student, we think they need to be placed at USB, or they're trying to kind of prescribe the services in their school district or from a parent or whatnot. What we do is we have to go all the way back to the assessment piece. We have to say, well, we need an assessment. We go right back to that number 1 bullet that Leah said, and we start at the assessment. We're not going into IEPs without having the assessment and collaboration on goals within that meeting, the collaboration on goals, but we don't go in without an assessment. Does that make sense? So we're not going in on the 3 and 4 piece of that IEP. We go all the way back to those present levels. Yes, the number one. And we're a part of that IEP assessment piece. We have to be there at the beginning, and that's for all services. They can't just, say we're going to put an IEP, we're going to put a USB placement without having the assessment goals and the services, and then we have the placement discussion.
So do you have at times looked at the assessment data and said, we appreciate the invitation, but there's nothing in this assessment that would qualify them to be one of our students or receive services?
I do not, but I think we probably could do that. But if there's a concern, if a parent has a concern or the school district has a concern, it's just best practice for us also to be with the child find issue. We want to be involved in that. We want to know what the issue is. We don't want to just say we can't make an isolated decision by law. So we really need to be a part of that discussion. It needs to be a discussion.
So you move through the process, even though there may be questions about the assessment level,
Yes.
but then you look at, when the supports actually what they're needing with supports.
Right. It could be that we just say these accommodation or supports that need to be listed in the IEP, and maybe we need to have a consultation piece that we're checking on them twice a year, or we're checking on them every 3 months or whatnot. So that's just all part of that IEP development. It's very, very authentic and organic, and it needs to start from that beginning assessment piece.
Great, thank you.
Thank you so much, Associate Superintendent Patton, because it's really important. And that's one of the reasons that I included the evaluation piece on this under service provider, because USDB USDB provides expertise that really informs both the assessment, the present level process, and then also the service process. And we're really lucky in Utah that we have that collaboration. But any team, even if USDB was out of the picture, that process that Susan just described is the process. Even if USDB didn't exist, if the student doesn't have a vision loss or a hearing loss, that is the process the IEP team has to follow. When you get to the point where you're like, oh gosh, we don't know who to bring in, we don't know what our discussion, we don't know where to go, you go back to the beginning, to the assessment process, and you bring in the expertise that you need right here. You bring in more regular education teacher expertise. You bring in more special education teacher or provider expertise until you can get to that point where the team can either come to consensus or a hearing officer is going to have to make the decision. So great question, and thank you for that response, Superintendent Patton. Okay, so then back to the placement. Okay, so like I was saying, USDB may have a special class, a special school that would support a student, and the school district or charter school may also have a special class or a special school that could support the student. And it's at that point where the team really goes back to number 3, the services and supports that the student needs, the goals. Back to number 2, the goals that the team already determined that the student needs to meet in the next year. And like Susan said, back to the present level of academic and functional performance to then make the decision about placement. And parents are required members of the IEP team. So their expertise also really contributes to this conversation, specifically number 4, but the entire IEP conversation. So a couple considerations that it's really important to note that are specific to students with hearing loss and students with vision loss. And this is guidance from both the Department of Education and Office of Civil Rights. And so when it comes to students who are deaf, hard of hearing, blind, visually impaired, and deaf-blind, the IEP team has to be very careful, more careful than the IEP teams of students in the other disability categories when it comes specifically related to auxiliary aids and services. There is guidance about assistive technology, guidance about communication, and USDB and LEAs are very familiar with this guidance and are very good at following the guidance. There is also, did I just raise my own hand? Does someone else have a hand up? Sorry,
No,
something
it's
weird.
yours.
Something weird just happened on my screen.
You made the
Okay.
gesture while you were talking, like you were raising your.
Oh, thank you,
automatically-
Superintendent. Yeah. Oh, I didn't know that was a thing. Okay.
Next time we're gonna have little balloons that how.
Yeah, exactly. I'll do the heart. I didn't know that was a thing. Okay. So the other piece of guidance that's really important for you as board members to consider is there is guidance from the Office of Civil Rights about American Sign Language and least restrictive environment. The students who use American Sign Language as their primary method of communication, the Office of Civil Rights has issued guidance that then has been cited in lots of case law. Okay, that it is actually less restrictive for a student who uses American Sign Language to attend a class with other students. It could be. Every decision is individualized, but it definitely could be less restrictive for a student who uses American Sign Language as their primary method of communication to be in a special class or a special school with other students who use American Sign Language so that they can have direct communication with their peers, but also so that they can have direct communication with their teachers and service providers instead of through an interpreter. So that alters the least restrictive environment continuum for students who use American Sign Language as a group. All decisions obviously still have to be individualized because it's an individualized education program, but that guidance is very important to students who use American Sign Language because being able to have direct communication with peers is the foundation of the least restrictive environment part of the statute. Okay, so last
One
part.
quick question then.
Oh, sorry.
How does that apply to our states who do not have schools for the deaf? I mean,
So
because
it
not
doesn't
every
have to be a
state
special
does.
school. It can also be a special class.
Okay.
Yeah, so bring students who are deaf and hard of hearing together. But teams make decisions, not states, not school districts and charter schools, teams. And so if it's a really small school district, they can collaborate with another small school district. A state could step in and support the decision. A lot of collaboration. If you remember clear back at the beginning and one of the very first slides, one of the responsibilities of the state education agency is interagency collaboration. And so supporting LEAs in trying to support students is a responsibility that you have, that you delegate to me as your state director. And so in other states, that is something that the state supports school districts and charter schools in helping students.
I have a quick example too. We have students who come here from Wyoming because they do not have a school for the deaf, but that's the placement that they need. And so they pay tuition to Utah and the kids come here across the border. If they're close enough, they daily, but otherwise they come to our dorms in Ogden and they stay here during the week and they're transported home afterwards.
That's helpful. Okay. Thank you.
Great collaboration. Okay, so here are your possible decision points, and obviously there are more, but here are some really important ones related to the law, okay, to the implementation of the IDEA. So Utah system, evaluation is required. USDB plays an important role in the evaluation system. When when we're talking about students who are deaf and hard of hearing, blind, visually impaired, deaf, blind, students who have multiple disabilities that include one of those disabilities. So USDB is able to, and you as a board are going to have to make the decision about what they actually do. Okay, but they are able to provide expertise related to evaluation or audiology, speech, although almost all school districts and charter schools do have expertise in providing speech, but when a student is deaf or hard of hearing specifically, USDB has specialized expertise. So even above and beyond, you know, what an SLP who just graduates from a regular program might have. Communication, we've talked about that in the OCR guidance. Learning media for students who are blind and visually impaired. Are they going to, is it best for them to use Braille? Is it best for them to use large print? And assistive technology. And we're lucky also in Utah that we have a state assistive technology team that you support through IDEA funds that we transfer to the Division of Rehabilitative Services. They're housed over there in Workforce Services, but IDEA does pay for that team. So those USDB currently has expertise and provides those services, and you as a board are going to need to decide how much, when, if USDB should continue to provide those services, and to whom, if USDB is going to continue to provide the expertise in those services related to evaluation. Then the next one related to services. So remember, special education equals specially designed instruction. And then for some students, it equals related services, one of which is transportation. And that's one of the biggest expenses. And Superintendent Coleman has been talking about that in the last few meetings about transportation. And that's going to be a decision point for you, because transporting students from all over the state to 3-ish, 4, if we count Washington County central locations, is expensive, as opposed to sending USDB services out to the students instead of bringing the students to USDB. But then you have to remember the OCR decision about communication, and you do currently have a rule, although it's a decision point because you could change the rule, about the 180 minutes of service per day. And that's a decision point for USDB to determine if they should bring the students in or if they should go out to the students. So that's one of the decision points that you have made related to economy of scale. You determined years ago that 180 minutes was the good place where it made sense to bring a student to USDB as opposed to sending a teacher or teachers or providers to the student, was at that 180-minute mark. And maybe that's something that you want to change. Another thing, USDB provides a lot of extracurricular and co-curricular activities and as supports to students. One thing that I want to mention, I know we're getting close to time, but one thing I want to mention that has come up and will come up in your discussions as you were inviting special education directors into the work group conversation. Students, because we have the wonderful resource in USDB, students who are blind, visually impaired, and deaf, hard of hearing do have access to activities that other students with disabilities across the state don't necessarily have access to. If you think about another low incidence disability, autism, we don't have any kind of statewide or even LEA activity support for students with autism. And that is a question that comes up from parents and from special education directors. The extra support that students who attend USDB or who don't attend but who are blind, visually impaired, deaf, hard of hearing, and deaf blind But remember the OCR decision about communication. Remember the federal guidance about access to communication for this particular group of students. There may very well be precedent for that, but that is a decision point for you. Placement. So service delivery. And we did talk about that. USDB has special classes, USDB has special schools, USDB has the residential option. And USDB provides itinerant services. School districts and mostly school districts, but some charter schools do provide some of those options. And so that can appear like duplication. So that is a decision point for all of you as well. What is the line that you may choose to create about which direction you are going to support as far as placement on the continuum? How much placement option should USDB provide versus how much placement option LEAs should continue to provide, or should now provide, should develop? I think I saw a hand.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I just wanted to make a comment on the board members. You're very familiar with the expanded core curriculum. That's also a consideration as far as our enrichment activities are, that we have that expanded core curriculum, just like the OCR ruling that Leah was talking about. I just wanted to mention that, Leah.
Oh, thank you so much. I should have, before I send this presentation to all of you, I'll actually add that, Susan. That's really important. Thank you. There is case law about the expanded core curriculum for students who are blind and visually impaired. So yes, thank you for adding that, and I'll add it before you get the presentation. Okay, the last thing on the list is the FAPE standard. And Vice Chair Earl, Vice Chair Wood, and in this case, Chair Wood, the question that you brought up about, how do you decide? Okay, so this is how the Supreme Court decides. And this is how a hearing officer would begin the decision-making process and hopefully end the decision-making process. The Supreme Court has said that it's the team's responsibility to develop an IEP that is reasonably calculated to enable a child to make progress appropriate in light of the child's circumstances. So this is according to the Supreme Court. And interestingly, this particular decision came as a result of a student who is deaf. So this decision is based on a student who is deaf. So in your deliberations, the decision points that you have in front of you, you do have to consider the unique needs, and you know this, but you have to consider the unique needs of students who are blind and visually impaired, deaf, hard of hearing, and deaf blind. But you need to consider them. So that's the group of students, that's the disability, but every decision has to be made for the individual child. And then you, as policymakers, are making decisions about the system. And if we go all the way back to the beginning, the question that the legislature asked you is, how does USDB fit into the system? And there are lots of different ways to take the individual child and those three disability categories into account into the bigger system, and do it legally and do it compliantly. You can do it the way you're currently doing it, which you have identified may be more expensive or maybe require more funding than you currently have. You can do it differently in ways that will take advantage more of LEA economies of scale and may not cost as much. But the way that you are going to answer those questions, you need to keep in mind that because you have been doing it this way for a while, it is possible that some parents will will choose and believe that the current way is required for their student to receive a free, appropriate public education. And therefore, if you choose to change it, like I said before, may request a due process hearing. And you just have to be ready for that. Not that they will win, but that is a possibility. So I just want to make sure that you keep that on your radar. Vice Chair Wood, I will send it back to you.
Thank you. We have reached our time. I hope that each of you take this video and watch it and rewatch it as we move through this system in the next few months. I'm so grateful for your knowledge and what you've taken the time to share with us. Are there any? I see your camera on, Vice Chair Booth. Do you have any final words for us before we close this meeting?
I'm just so grateful for excellent instruction. It's so good to just bring everything together and to be reminded of our responsibility so that we can move forward with the questions that have been posed to us by the legislature. It's very helpful. Dr. Voorhees, we are grateful for your knowledge and experience and for being such a great teacher. Thank you. I think we've learned a lot today.
Thank you, sir.
I would agree. All right, I will take one more. Oh, Member Brinton, did you have any final words?
I just want to echo that, Leah. Wow, what an amazing education that was on special ed. So thank you so much, and I will be watching and rewatching. So I sure appreciate this today.
Great. All right.
And I will make a motion to adjourn.
All right. Thank you. Is there a second?
I don't think there's a second, but I'm for that. I'll vote for yes.
All right. Well, thank you for all of you being here today. We will move forward to the board, our two motions, and we will continue to work through these questions. Our next meeting, we may have to go back to those questions now and figure out what more do we need to know to answer those questions. So thank you so much. We'll move to all in favor to adjourn.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good day.